Hello and welcome to Adult Music, the podcast with music for the mature mind. This is episode 158. I'm your co-host, Russ.
And I'm your co-host, Mike, and my mind is maturing all the time.
I can see from here the level of maturity, Mike.
I think it might be like a banana. You know, it's getting black and, you gotta, we might have to use it soon before it goes out.
We're going to use it tonight, talking about the music on the program we've got picked here. I noticed that in our statistics, Canada has passed Japan to become the number 2 country in downloads, Mike.
That's awesome because, I figure they're listening to us because they like us. I secretly think if people are listening to us that we know, they hate listening to us here in Japan.
It's possible, yeah.
They're like, oh, these guys are so good. I really hate that.
I always wondered if it was all your extended family in the U.S. that keeps the numbers really high there.
I think if they're in New York or somewhere like that, maybe. But I really wish we could get like a distribution of, which parts of Japan are listening to us, because I'm really curious to know.
Yeah, maybe that'll come up sometime.
Because more people listen to us than we have friends. And I know this for a fact because we don't have friends. So everybody listening is kind of a stranger to us. But I'm just kind of wondering who it is and how they found out about us, too. But yeah, Canada, welcome aboard, Canadians, listening to that good music.
Thanks, Canadian listeners. We appreciate having you here. Mm-hmm. And see if you stay in that number 2 spot into April.
Yeah.
And I also want to thank from last week trumpeters Julian Bertrand and Eric Jacobson for sharing our episode on Facebook. We featured their recordings, and also Wide Hive Records.
I was out last night with a bunch of friends who are kind of fans of podcasting in general. Mm-hmm. And they listened to us. And one of the things one of the guys told me is that, and I suspect this is true of a lot of listeners, maybe even the ones, especially the ones in Japan, that they like the opening repartee that we're doing now. And then as soon as we start talking about music, they stop listening to the podcast. Yeah. I guess we just get too nerdy for them or something.
I guess so.
I don't know. It'd be cool to keep this up the whole time, but we'll see. We'll see if we can kind of lighten things up during the music part. But, you get all those great music samples there, so it's okay.
Hey, speaking of lightening things up, we have a few earthly departures to talk about.
We have some sad ones, too.
So I've got to get over to the keyboard here for our theme. And there's the cracking of the knuckles.
You can put that knuckle cracking on the podcast. Jeez, that's going to bother people. Anyway.
Here we go.
Okay, now, when we stopped recording last week, because we recorded a day early,
right,
I got on the internet and found out that the great pianist Maurizio Pollini died, and we couldn't include him last week, so here he is this week. Now, he's major, and he's especially important for me because he was one of my really first favorite pianists. When he was 18 years old, he won the Chopin competition.
Right.
I believe, yeah, and that really just made him. And 2 of the judges on that panel were Arthur Rubinstein, one of the great pianists of the 20th century, and Nadia Boulanger. Wow. I mean, some of the people there, they're really high-class people. And Arthur Rubinstein said about them, he already plays better than all of us.
Oh, wow.
He was 18. Now, the thing about Pollini's playing, they used to call it aristocratic. And the thing I got from it was, I hate to use this word, the architectural quality of it. Now, what that means is, classical music, if you're listening to, say, a sonata form movement, the first movement of a sonata, kind of goes in a certain way. And Pollini would draw out the whole form of it. He'd keep the music going so that you could just kind of hear, the architecture of it. We don't really think of music as being built or constructed. But when he played it, it sounded that way. And he wouldn't really linger on details. Like one of the recordings we're going to hear tonight, well, I'll get to that when we talk about it. So he wouldn't pull out certain details and stuff. He would really just kind of go through it, and he would always seem to set perfect tempos. He had this really ironclad technique. He was really one of the first great super virtuosos, too. I remember a recording of, first of all, the Pierre Boulez second piano sonata, and he also played, was one of the first pianists to play Stravinsky's Petrushka. It seems like now everybody can play this really difficult piece. But yeah, he did this really formidable recording of that. I got to know the 2 Chopin piano sonatas from his album, and they remain unsurpassed for me. And I think that's because his interpretation of them is absolutely unique. No one's ever really tried to play them in that sort of architectural way. So that still remains my favorite recording. So listen to that Chopin piano sonatas 2 and 3. And of course, he's also famous, really for a lot of things. But the last 5 Beethoven piano sonatas, and he re-recorded them at the end of his life. We did the very last recording.
Those,
yeah, in 2022. We talked about one of them. The other one was in 2020, before the podcast started. But yeah, the Hammerklavier. We're going to hear the Hammerklavier tonight, in fact, by Beatrice Rana, but we'll get to that later.
Right.
And even the newer recordings, they were still had that wonderful architectural style. The older ones from the 70s is a classic piano recording that really everybody should have. But not everybody likes it because, again, people will call him, what's the word, unemotional, like not sterile, but something like that. I don't agree. I really think that he's just focusing on the form, and the playing is really stunning if you really listen to it. So that's a famous recording too. It especially works in Beethoven's last piano sonata, Opus 111, because the second movement of that, which is the last movement, is only a 2-movement work. The rhythm starts to speed up with each section. Like you'll have like eighth notes and then triplets and then 16th notes, and then it'll just go on until at the end it's just a trill. So, the speed just becomes undefined. And he does that like so beautifully. I mean, I think better than any other pianist ever has. Now, you may disagree and think that, there are better performances of that work. Yeah, sure, maybe. But there's none like this. It's really unique. And he was just that kind of pianist, and I'm going to really just miss the fact that he's been with me really from my whole life, starting from college on, so his playing. So, yeah, I'm going to miss that a lot. I actually got to hear him play live at the Boston Symphony Hall, playing a Beethoven piano concerto. I think it was number 4. And with Claudio Bado conducting the Boston Symphony Orchestra, it was really amazing. It felt like an historical musical event. So that was really special. Anyway, rest in peace, Maurizio Pollini. The other musical death we have this week is the composer Péter Eötvös, who was I believe, Hungarian composer. He conducted a lot too. He was one of these great proselytizers of contemporary music and wrote a lot of music himself. His music was championed by a violinist that we really like on this podcast, Patricia Kopachinskaya, so we got to hear some of his works played by her. I wasn't really a big fan of his music, but there you go. He was a contemporary composer, someone who was really important to music, so we miss him too. Rest in peace also. Péter Eötvös.
All right, well, that's all the sad news, so now we can move on to getting into this fresh music we've got here. As always, in the episode description, you'll find links to Spotify and Apple Music for all the music that we're going to discuss, all save one, the last recording. I'll explain that when we get to it. And at the top of the description, there's a link to the full episode playlist. That's all the music in one place on Deezer, CD quality streaming music from France, where you can also listen to the podcast if you want to get everything in the same place. Now, if you don't see the full description or the recording list or links are not easy to access on the app or platform that you listen to us on, please come over and check us out on our host site. That's Podbean, PODBEAN.com. Everything's clear and easy to follow there. If you enjoy the podcast, please follow or subscribe wherever you prefer listening to us and recommend us to a music-loving friend. If you take a moment to give us a ranking or write a short review, that helps us get listed in the recommendations in the music categories, and it's another way that people can find out about us. Come over and follow us on Facebook as well. We've got a page there, put up little extra tidbits and new releases during the week. You can see our handsome faces, interaction with the artists, leave a comment or a message over there. And if you'd like to contact us directly with any comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is adultmusicpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com. We want to, as always, recommend The Same Difference to Jazz Fans, One Jazz Standard podcast. That's done by our friends AJ and Johnny, who look at several versions of the same jazz standard. In each episode, they play little snippets from each version, talk about the history of the original and their opinions on the different versions. You get some history and humor all in one place. They come out with a new episode twice a month. And there's a link to their podcast in the description. And if you stick around to the end of this episode, you can hear a little audio promo from them. And in their last episode, Mike, The Same Difference guys had jazz vocalist Melanie Collins.
Yeah, that was really cool.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. And we're working on setting something up similar to that coming up soon.
We've been trying to do this for a long time. I've always wanted to get a guest host on listening to us. Now, we did get them, but they're podcasters, and we're going to get a musical guest this time.
I think we've got the right person for it. So more details as we get things rolling on that.
Yeah.
We're also going to play musical samples for you so you can get a better idea of the recordings we're talking about. And this is our fair use disclaimer. Music sample clips are for commentary and educational purposes. We recommend that listeners listen to the complete recordings, most of which are available on streaming services in the links provided. And we also suggest that if you enjoy the music, you consider purchasing the CDs or high-quality downloads to support the artists. And now we're all wound up and ready to go with, one of our favorite composers.
Yeah, well, the repartee is over, so I want to encourage listeners, don't touch that dial. Keep listening, because this is going to be really interesting.
Shall I butt in more often during the classical section?
Really, we should butt in a lot more for both, not just for the I should butt in more for the jazz section, right. But by then I've already had a whiskey or two. It's harder to do. I'll do what I can. Okay. Anyway, C.P.E. Bach, one of our favorite composers. Yes. This is a record of his symphonies titled From Berlin to Hamburg. I'll explain that title in a moment. This is by the Akademie für Alte Musik Berlin, an ensemble I really have loved over the years. And this is on the Harmonia Mundi label. This was released March 22nd. All right, well, C.P.E. Bach, I remember reading this essay by Joseph Brodsky, Nobel Prize winner for literature, Joseph Brodsky, called Homage to Marcus Aurelius. And he talks about a time when he was in Italy and he's in a taxi. And the taxi driver is driving by the Capitoline Hill in Rome. And there's a statue, and the taxi driver indicates it and says, it's Marco Aurelio, which is a very informal way of saying Marcus Aurelius. And Brodsky goes on to say that he really admires the way Italians can just, they're so familiar with these people, these like great people of the past, that they'll just talk about them, like they're their friends. Oh, it's Marco, whereas he, in his Russian school when he was younger, learned about Marcus Aurelius, the great Roman emperor with the periods after every word, that sort of thing. Anyway, I feel the same way about C.P.E. Bach. I kind of refer to him as C.P.E. because, first of all, if you say Bach, everybody thinks Johann Sebastian Bach, the great Bach. Mm-hmm. And C.P.E. was his second surviving son, so he's second in line there. And we've been listening to him for a long time, really, since 2012. And I've heard his music before that, but I really started getting into it in around 2012. So I kind of refer to him as CPE, so you'll forgive me if I'm informal, like Italians with Marco Aurelio. And I'm going to refer to Gottfried Emanuel Bach as my pal, CPE. So here we go. He was in Berlin from 1738 to 1768, and then he went to Hamburg from 1768 onwards. He was Kapellmeister there, and he succeeded Telemann. So they really had some musical life there in Hamburg back in the day. They had some pretty high-level Kapellmeisters up there. Anyway, these symphonies date partly from one period and partly from the other. That's where the title From Berlin to Hamburg go. So Berlin is the earlier period, Hamburg is the later period. All right, and these are all just symphonies, so they're 3-movement works. There are 6 of them, but they're all different, and sometimes in surprising ways. I would like to highlight those differences for you. The first one is Symphony in C major. Here we go with the numbers. H649, WQ174. WQ is, I believe, Watt Gwen or something like that. This was a Berlin work from 1755. In fact, these all go in not the order they were composed, but the 3 Berlin symphonies come first, and then 4 of the Hamburg symphonies are next. So they're in a sort of chronological order. Okay, let's get to the first movement of the C major symphony, the first work on the album. The first movement, Allegro assai, and the opening has good pacing with some nice sort of appoggiaturas into the harmony. Let's see if you can hear those. I'm going to give you a lot of tests today, but let's hear this one first. Yeah, and I don't know what's going to happen after that, so I'm going to come out.
There's a lot of energy there.
Yeah, did you hear the appoggiaturas? Dun, 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 dun. Okay, so there's like a sort of leaning into the chord from a lower note. I really liked that. It really caught my ear. So we had CPE's characteristic unexpected pauses. They're nicely played by the ensemble here. The speed sets off the odd pauses and key diversions well and made me smile. I was smiling throughout this whole album, really. And this music should make you smile. At 1 minute and 40 seconds, there's a repeat of the opening that leads, via some diversions, to an open cadence leading into the next movement. Okay, that's unusual too. The movement doesn't actually end. It has like an open cadence, And that leads into the second movement, the Andante. And this melody is weepy in a rather theatrical way, and it's pretty straightforward as a movement. I guess we'd say the emotion is performative. It doesn't feel like it's really sad. It kind of feels like someone's putting on like a sad show on the stage. That's the quality I got out of this particular interpretation. That quality is enjoyable here, as it would be on the stage. The inevitable odd diversionary harmonies creep in after the 2-minute mark, and at 2 minutes and 35 seconds, there's an extremely long pause, surely played out longer by the ensemble. They kind of stretch it a bit, and I liked that. And it makes us wonder what's happening. Did I lose my internet connection for my streaming? I didn't know. I was like, is this still playing? Because the pause was really unnaturally long. And I'm wondering if CPE indicated that in the score. It's one of his typical tricks, though. This ends with a cadence, and then we go into the third movement, so pretty cleanly. This has a confident, ebullient theme. I really enjoyed this, too. Let's sample that theme. Yeah, no tricks there, huh? It's a nice, happy, sunny day, going out for a walk, feeling good.
Yeah.
Feeling groovy. Okay, so it's a rondo theme, and that's a pretty memorable theme. You'll hear it every time it comes back. The first departure is just as active and cheerful as the opening. It does lapse into an odd key toward the end, and doesn't quite find its feet again, and decides to go back to the rondo theme. I rather liked that trick, too. It doesn't just go back to the rondo theme. It gets lost and says, oh, I guess I'd better start over. Let's hear that moment. See if you can pull this out. This is from the 2-minute mark. And we are safe again. Did you hear that, everybody? Like the odd pausing is almost like they're forgetting. They don't know which way to go and just start the theme up. I really love it. It's a great joke. And the Akademie für Alte Musik Berlin just pull it out so perfectly with their pacing, their pauses. They have the sense of humor necessary to put this across, and I really appreciated that. It sounded pretty goofy here. I really enjoyed it. This trick repeats once more before the movement ends, by the way. Tracks 4 through 6. Symphony in D major. This is another Berlin symphony. This is H651, WQ176, or Beethoven 176. The first movement, Allegro assai. It's a bold opening and has timpani too, so it already sounds different than the first symphony. This one sounds more celebratory, like it's being played at a big occasion. The changes of texture in this movement have everything to do with timbral combinations, and these changes are charming when we hear them. The movement winds down into an open cadence again, like the first symphony that we heard. And that leads into the next movement, which I'm going to sample. This is the slow movement. It starts elegantly, and let's hear that elegant theme. This is going to start up right away, so I'm going to fade it up. It's elegant and a little haunting, too. And then at the 58-second mark, this really beautiful pizzicato texture is heard. And it's quiet enough to make it sound like it's being played on tiptoe. You know, it's kind of like someone tiptoeing around. That's why I'm not going to sample it, because I feel like you'll have to put your ear next to the speaker in order to hear it on our podcast. Anyway, the section ends at 1 minute and 50 seconds, and the opening repeats. We hear the tiptoeing pizzicato section again at 2 minutes and 30 seconds, and the opening theme comes back with a bit of a haunted feel to it. But suddenly, it's emboldened and ends on an open cadence that leads to the next movement. So we have another open cadence that's inconclusive. The next movement sort of concludes it. The presto, the third movement, track 6, starts boldly and in a celebratory fashion, as though the feeling at the end of the second movement has been brushed aside. The movement has a lively dance quality to it, the rhythm played with a light Italian lift. At 2 minutes and 25 seconds, there's a pause leading right back to the opening theme, and the piece ends in celebratory fashion. There's not much sleight of hand in this work as far as rhythm and harmony go, but the changing timbral combinations draw the interest here. Track 7 through 9, Symphony in E minor, H652, Vatquen 177. This is the last of the Berlin symphonies on this album, and this particular work occupies a special place among CPE's works in the Berlin period. It's a virtuosic work with a uniquely somber and threatening mood, and it made a great impression on contemporaries and achieved unusually wide circulation. And I think one of the people it made an impression on was probably Beethoven, because when you listen to this opening, it actually sounds like something Beethoven would come up with. It's a sound that we associate with Beethoven, but remember, this is earlier than Beethoven. Let's hear the opening of this work. Yeah, I think that we would refer to that as Sturm und Drang. Haydn wrote a few symphonies like that as well. It was kind of popular in the early 18th century. There was a short period where that sort of thing was in vogue. There's a quick sleight of hand in the change of key near the cadence at the end of that first section. We didn't get to that. But after that, the strings zip off into odd key areas and land in a surprising key, followed by an odd pause. I want to sample this part too. This is really only shortly after what we just heard. So from about the 1 minute and 10 second mark. You're on some kind of harmonic roundabout with those things leading up to a pause. You really don't know where you're going to come out. It's pretty interesting. The middle of the work tries to sort all this out by smoothing out the rhythm and working out those key areas visited earlier. Brilliant quick playing by the ensemble on this track, and some satisfying slamming on of the brakes to pull the rug out from under us. This movement ends in a traditional sounding open cadence, surprisingly enough, because there's so many other odd things in it. Track 8, the second movement, Andante moderato. The cadence really isn't resolved here. The music just sort of continues in this slower tempo. The opening theme is straightforward and rather nice. The lower strings resolve the harmonies in standard form at the end of phrases. There's a trio section starting at 1 minute and 39 seconds, and this movement is all elegance and charm. At the 2 minute and 20 second mark, there's a veering into a new key via a unison of string phrase, which we've heard plenty of in this movement. At the 2 minute and 48 second mark, the opening theme restarts comfortably in its original key. Track 9, the third movement, Allegro, has fast, dotted rhythm phrases. That's to start it out. I liked the stretched out note just before the cadence at the end of phrases, an effect perfectly achieved by the ensemble. Listen for that in this sample. Again, that's the ensemble, like, doing that. The da, really quiet. You expect it to land with a bit more force, but it doesn't. They just kind of pull it away from you. I really liked that. Made me smile. Just high spirits.
Yeah.
All over. There's a slower harmonically wandering middle section with some CPE games played. Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach games, I mean. And at around the 1 minute and 30-second mark of this brief movement, the opening theme comes back. Tracks 10 through 12 move us into the Hamburg period. This is Symphony in G major, H657, Wattgren 182, number 1. This and the remaining 3 symphonies all belong to a set of 6, so we're hearing 4 of the 6, that Bach wrote in 1773 on commission from his patron, Baron Gottfried von Swieten, who at the time was Austrian ambassador to the Prussian court. Swieten asked that CPE give himself a completely free hand in these works without taking any account of the difficulties that would necessarily arise for performance. Oh, isn't that what every composer wants to hear? Just do what you want. We'll work out the difficulties. Anyway, he produced 6 works, and these are all really interesting. The 10th track is Movement 1, Allegro di molto. This sounds like it'll be off to a quick start, but CPE's quirkiness is soon all over this work, with an early slamming on of the brakes and quick changes of mood. Let's hear that. Yeah, when that cadence is coming, I don't know. But I can tell you, we haven't even heard like 40 seconds of this. And CPE's already got a lot of key areas to balance out in order to make this work sound cohesive. So he's already set himself quite a task. And that's what Baron van Swieten asked for. So There you go. High spirits abound in the movement overall. And the sudden veering away from convention only lifts the spirits more. It's just so surprising. And it just sort of makes your mind wake up if you kind of following the harmony even a little bit. A sudden slowing ends the movement on an open cadence that makes way for the next movement, and this is marked Poco Adagio, track 11. This has a close to mid-tempo kind of creeping theme to it. It actually sounds pretty playful. Let's hear the opening of this movement. Yeah, and I also want to point out that those sudden, like, sforzandos, like when you have quiet music, then all of a sudden, like, this really loud section comes in, is something that Beethoven is going to use, like, in all of his music. It's one of his sort of fingerprints, really. So CPE is doing this very early, and I think Beethoven may have picked it up from him. Anyway, the music gets more lyrical moments, but keeps going back to that staccato rising theme we heard in the sample. This is played up just after the start of the second minute and becomes a sort of development where the figure keeps creeping into new keys. The movement again ends on an open cadence. Track 12, the third movement, is a presto, and this starts quietly in a Mozartian way and crescendos into high-spirited accented chords. There's a sudden interrupting chord at 40 seconds that the Akademie really lean into, as they do every time we hear it, which throws the music off its approach to the cadence, but it quickly regains its footing. Towards the end of the first minute, we go into a middle section which starts groping around for a key to settle into. It sounds like some out-of-control carousel. We eventually make our way back to the opening theme at the beginning of the third minute. We get a repeat of some of the opening section before a brief coda takes us off-key and then quietly back to reach a final cadence. By the way, if you're kind of not so sure about what cadences sound like, I think CPE Bach's music are a good way to learn because he interrupts them so dramatically. You can just feel that odd dissatisfaction. You'll know when you reach that resting place that is the cadence that ends the musical paragraph. Tracks 13 through 15, Symphony in C major, H659, Beethoven 182, number 3. Track 13, the first movement, Allegro assai, an odd rushing rhythm opens the work. At 32 seconds, this abruptly changes to something much shyer, but no less appealing. CPE also has a way of prolonging certain sections for comic effect. He'll let sections repeat where you think a cadence is coming. There are lots of sudden stops in this movement, including an especially dramatic one that ends the movement on a sour note and abruptly takes us into the next movement. All right, now I'm going to try to sample that ending and then going into the second movement. Sometimes this doesn't work on streaming, but let's see what we can do here. Okay, so that sour note winds up being the opening note of this movement, and its harsh bow-sawing quality is probably something that inspired Beethoven again. In the section of static harmony that we hear in his third symphony, in the first movement, there's a part where the harmony really stops moving and is just kind of sawing away on this one chord, and it slowly moves into other chords too. And it sounds just like this. It's the same sort of quality. It's used to a different effect in that work, of course, which is much bigger than this one. But if you know that work, you might recognize what I'm talking about. It sounds too unusual and similar to be coincidental. The section in Beethoven's Third Symphony would sound like this. The music here gently meanders through keys, but constantly finds that harsh tone. It does settle into a light final cadence, though. And then the third movement, Allegretto, has a country dance-sounding theme opening the movement. Let's hear that. Yeah, you just never know when that cadence is going to come in a CPE Bach work, so we'll get out of it there. So anyway, that theme, as you heard, is catchy, and it will serve as the rondo theme. It repeats at the 45-second mark. The episodes in between the theme are harmonically adventurous, making the return of the rondo theme that much more reassuring. There are loads of tricks and false cadences in this movement, though we do reach a solid cadence after a repeat of the theme at the end. Tracks 16 through 18, Symphony in A major, H660, Beethoven 182, number 4. The first movement, Allegro ma non troppo, has a pretty circling violin opening, followed by those odd harmonic dead ends that CPE is so fond of. Let's hear this. Yeah, by the way, this music's stubborn refusal to flow from beginning to end is probably why it didn't become part of the 20th century repertoire, even though I think it's really great. I think its time has come. I think in our internet age of short attention spans,
it's perfect, yeah.
We relate to it because we can take those little chunks of harmony and changes and kind of, it's like we're flipping from one channel to the next or something. So you might have noticed the opening bounces like a Vivaldi piece. It's sunny and pleasant in its wide open A major. CPE is clearly reflecting Italian ideas here. There's one bit in the second minute where CPE uses those odd break slamming bass notes to build up to a cadence that isn't reached. The second movement spends some quiet time trying to find its way, and by the third minute starts bouncing along again. This movement doesn't end. As it moves to its cadence, it unexpectedly slips into the melody of the next movement, and that's marked largo e innocentemente. I guess slowly and innocently. This is track 17. The slow movement starts nobly and elegantly with sustained chords in the lower end and a dotted rhythm theme up top. This movement makes its royal way through the occasional harmonic obstacle to its inconclusive ending. I got the image of an elegant royal figure daintily stepping around dog poop in his way. I'll play the theme and the first of those episodes, and you'll hear the harmonic disturbance or the dog poop at the end of the sample. So listen, please, and just especially pay attention at the end. Okay, so at the very end of that here, kind of, whoa, I gotta get out of the way of whatever that is there.
Better check your royal shoes, yeah.
Check your royal shoes. There you go. There's a pause at the end of the movement, and then that's followed by the next movement, the third movement, Allegro Assai, track 18. This has an energetic theme, catchy, but with some insistent non-vibrato, nasally sustained notes up top at times, disturbing the harmony and ultimately redirecting it. Otherwise, the music gallivants toward its cadence more or less smoothly. At 1 minute and 54 seconds, there's a contrasting section, still lively, and at 2 minutes and 53 seconds, we hear a conclusive cadence, but the music continues after that for a repeat of the section. The last symphony on the album, Symphony in B minor, H661, Bach-Quen 182, number 5. Track 19, the first movement, Allegro. The theme that begins this sounds like we're getting into the work after some events have already occurred. So what we would say in Latin is in media res, in the middle of things. Listen to how this starts. Okay, we're not going to wait for a cadence or we'll get a copyright strike. Anyway, this leaves us in an interesting place harmonically as the music unwinds through various keys. The music is enjoyable, but we feel a bit harmonically lost, like we're already in the middle of the woods when the movement starts. This movement leads directly into the second movement without any resolution. The second movement, track 20, is Larghetto. It's the slow movement. Here, the themes are sustained and harmonically exploratory, with melodic lines trying to focus into the particular harmony and balance that harmony out so that we accept it as the home key. This work is probably the most harmonically adventurous on the album. It ends on an open cadence, and the third movement, Presto, track 21, opens with a real sense of urgency. Let's hear that. Hurry up, we're late. It's time to get back home. The forte are hit hard and resound through the speakers. You heard those bam, bam, really loud. The movement is fairly repetitive and serves to balance the harmony, really. I'm surprised at how many proto-Beethoven ideas are to be heard in all of these symphonies, really. Beethoven himself, of course, spends the whole fourth movement of his Fifth Symphony establishing the C major final key because he's got so much harmonic tension built up over the first three movements. By the way, if you want to do a little trick, if you have a recording of the Beethoven Fifth Symphony, listen to only the fourth movement and don't listen to the first three. It'll sound really weird. because it's all about rebalancing. It just kind of sounds off somehow. You have to hear the whole work. Anyway, this movement, this CPE Bach movement, ends rather subtly. There's a lot to discover in repeated listenings of this work, and I'm sure of the entire album. Well, as you could probably guess, I really loved this. It was really fun, and it ranks among my favorite CPE Bach recordings of these works, certainly, and probably of my CPE Bach works in general. The Academy for Alte Musik Berlin have a handle on CPE's sense of humor and pace themselves in a way that sets off the pauses and sudden awkward key changes to the best effect. All of these works take different approaches in their style, and the Academy for Alte Musik Berlin commendably make sure their approach to each work differs to the extent that we notice this quality in the individual works. This album as a whole lifted my spirits, it was fun, and I highly recommend it.
Pauses, false cadences, unexpected key and tempo changes. Yeah, CPE Bach is always fun to listen to. The performances here are enthusiastic and spirited, and the ensemble plays with agility and lightness. I like this, I think, as much or maybe more than the one I usually listen to, which is the Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment. I think that's 2015. Yeah. That's got the A major and B minor works on it. But this one has a real sense of fun in the performances. Like they really get all of those things we love about CPE Bach's compositions and draw them out in the performance. So I had a great time listening to this as well.
Yeah, I feel like CPE Bach's music, especially as performed here, is kind of what women look for on a date, you know? Unexpected things, you make them laugh, you surprise them. It's just great. So try that out.
Dating by CPE
Dating
Bach.
advice. See, the thing is, if you stopped listening after the opening repartee, you didn't get that dating advice.
You missed it. See,
you lucky listeners have it. You're welcome. Okay, anyway, let's move on to our second recording. This is a pianist we really love, Beatrice Rana. She's an Italian pianist, making a big name for herself recently. And this is a recording of two huge solo piano works, Chopin's Piano Sonata No. 2, the Funeral March Sonata, and Beethoven's massive Piano Sonata No. 29, the Hammerklavier. This is on Warner Classics. It was released on March 8th. So this is a major release, really, one of Warner Classics' star pianists. And these two mighty works seem never to have appeared together on the same album. They've been played loads of times. Both are in B flat. Chopin's is in B flat minor and Beethoven in B flat major. Rana says that both transcend the human condition in very different ways, but not completely different ways, because they both have much to do with the fear of death and the fear of loneliness. And she says that she recorded this during the, or she learned these works during the COVID pandemic when she had a lot of time alone. So she was sort of contemplating these ideas. All right, now, I want to mention, before we start talking about this, that Maurizio Pollini, who we talked about at the beginning, recently just died last week, also recorded both of these works, and they're some of the best recordings ever made of them. And unfortunately, I have, well, fortunately for me, I guess, but unfortunately for this recording, I have them in my ears now when I was listening to this. And this was a good recording, but the Pollini was so magisterial that I felt like this one fell a bit short. I don't want to sell it too short, though. Let's talk about it. The first track, first movement, Grave and Doppio Movimento, of the Chopin Piano Sonata No. 2, the Funeral March Sonata, has Rana not giving the intro as bold a statement as I've heard other pianists do, including Pollini. And the main theme has a galloping feel here. There's a real textural dimension to the rhythm. The second theme has a romantic feel, with a bit of hesitation to the melody. Rana's playing is very expressive. This is very different than the Pollini recording, which is kind of smoother and, again, sort of exposing the architecture of the piece. I wish I had another word for that, because everybody says, oh, the architecture. Rana plays the repeat at 2 minutes and 40 seconds very differently, with different pacing and dynamic structure. So Rana is a pianist who has a lot of ideas. Let's hear the second statement of the theme here. We're starting this at 3 minutes and 40 seconds. really beautiful playing, and we can hear all of the voices pretty clearly. It's really nicely played there. Rana gives all the parts a unique quality that I haven't heard in this piece before. At the 4-minute and 40-second mark, the development section starts, and here, Rana gives the rhythm a big pause. She chooses her dynamics and shapes her lines for maximum visceral impact, so on the body. I feel this pulling at my body, in fact. Each time familiar material repeats, she gives it a completely different sound, which I find impressive. Let's listen at 6 minutes and 30 seconds, where the bass line we heard in the previous sample is now quiet and suggestive. So this is almost a repeat of what we heard before, but it's later on in the piece. Okay, so I started that a bit early, but you heard that section again. Very different. The ideas sound like they're coming spontaneously. Oh, let's do it this way. Okay, the approach to the final cadence gets a quick crescendo. We move to the scherzo, the second movement. There's a fine hammering quality to the opening chords of this movement. Let's listen to that. I'm impressed with Rana's ear. She hears this music in a unique way. I was also impressed by the idea to give the end of the phrase a dancing quality by accenting its rhythm. At 1 minute and 12 seconds, the B section of this ABA form begins. The light dance quality is underplayed here, and the tone is kept at a sort of shy level. Let's hear a little bit of this. By the sampled section, it comes out of its shell. Remember, Rana doesn't play repeating material the same way twice, in this work anyway. It keeps the mind on the alert for what she'll come up with, and I enjoyed that aspect of the recording. The theme is back to its shyer guise when we hear it for the third time. The repeat of the A section comes across as a spontaneously decided on interpretation, though of course it's nothing of the sort. It keeps the listener engaged, wondering what will come next. By the end, Rana plays the rhythm of the opening phrase with a slight retard, or slowing down. The third movement is the famous Marche funèbre. Rana describes the trio in this movement as übermenschlich. You might recognize that word from Nietzsche. How a philosopher, like Nietzsche, might describe surpassing oneself in a transcendental way. Let's keep that in mind as we listen. The famous funeral march theme is suitably funereal, with the bass chords lightly growling. There's excellent tone here, and it sounds dark and somber with excellent pacing, very steady. I really liked this. It was really evocative. Let's hear the opening. The steady pace that she uses kind of puts me in mind of Ravel's piece, Le Gibet, the middle movement of his piano work, Scarbo. And I feel like that technique that Ravel requires in that work is being applied here. The slower pacing works exceptionally well, as you heard, and Rana manages to keep it from dragging. She plays the bass trills at 2 minutes and 41 seconds boldly, like it's a drum roll, and convinces me that that's what that trill represents. I never really thought of that before. At the 3-minute mark, the transcendent section begins, what Rana describes as the transcendent section. It begins with the sound of a distant memory, and Rana gives it a quiet sound, making the tone sound like it's coming from a distance. Let's sample that. I'll try to turn up the volume for you, too. I hope you were able to hear that. It's very quiet. She keeps a steady pace here, too, making her approach to this movement vary greatly from the approach to the previous two. The theme goes off on a tangent for a while, and when it repeats, it's almost impossibly quieter. At the 7-minute and 20-second mark, the funeral march theme comes back, played with much of the same tempo, but louder now, like it's more present in our consciousness. We move to the fourth movement, finale, marked presto. It's very short, as piano fans know, less than 2 minutes long. And I'm always interested in how pianists will approach this brief, rushing movement. It was once described as the wind howling through gravestones, undoubtedly because of its placement after the funeral march. Rana plays this with a kind of pushing and pulling subtlety, unexpectedly crescendoing and suddenly fading. Let's hear her approach. Okay, and I got to tell you, I'm not sure I agree with this interpretation, but this is what she's done here. It's a unique approach, I have to say, though. We're so familiar with this work that it will probably take a few listens to properly assess the interpretation of the sonata, but the creativity and technique are both impressive. The last chords come out as especially thunderous after the hesitant, hushed quality of the final notes of the figuration. Tracks 5 through 9 are Beethoven's Piano Sonata No. 29, the Hammerklavier, Opus 106. Rana says she learned the Beethoven due to the lockdown and connected with it. She says the third movement speaks so much about loneliness and solitude, about going deep into oneself, a complete mirror of what Rana was experiencing during lockdown. Meanwhile, the life-affirming fourth movement, with its great fugue, showed her there was also a chance to escape this condition. All right, well, movement 1, Allegro, this is track 5, starts explosively and fast. In fact, the quickness of the opening is the big surprise. Pauses are long and pregnant. Let's listen. The piano sound is full sounding with the bass impacting. Dynamics are all well captured. The quieter parts come up beautifully. Rana enables the detail of Beethoven's writing to be easily heard. I like the way at 1 minute and 39 seconds and afterward she plays the sforzandos as a kind of hiccup in the line of figuration. At the 2 minute and 38-second mark, the exposition repeats. Some of the details are played differently here, but this repeat isn't as dramatically different as the returning themes in the Chopin that we heard first on this album. I'm impressed at how vividly the bass patterns come up. At 4 minutes and 55 seconds, the development starts and the initial rhythms dance under Rana's hands, but there are many sudden stops as we would expect in Beethoven. At 5 minutes and 25 seconds, the fugal section had a quietness that makes one lean into the sound with pleasure. Rana is able to give each sudden change a completely new musical profile, making them stand out in contrast. I keep thinking of the Pollini recording of this, and he's more interested in keeping the longer lines intact. So it's a very different approach. At the 7-minute mark, the recapitulation starts and unfolds more or less as expected. There's some drama in the coda from 9 minutes on, the rhythm bounces in the louder sections, and the quieter threads come up well. This is far more straightforwardly played than the first two movements of the Chopin Sonata. Track 6 is the second movement, the Scherzo. It's very brief and acts almost like an intermezzo in this piece, separating the two great statements of the first and third movements. Rana again has the rhythm bouncing, springing off the 16th notes. Let's give this a sample. And we got a cadence at the end there. The middle section at 47 seconds has some quiet menace to it. That menace builds and is suddenly interrupted by the return of the A section in this ABA form movement. The ending is playful. Well, the playfulness goes away in the third movement, which is track 7, Adagio sostenuto. The opening here is played with a gauzy sound over the tone, an effect created by Rana herself. The melody comes up sensitively and chastely. The tone slowly becomes cleaner, and Rana doesn't linger on any harmonies, but keeps the melodic line and rhythm moving smoothly. Some lovely pianissimi are achieved along the way. I'm always interested in hearing how the waltzing section at 2 minutes and 50 seconds is played. Some pianists manage to get a light jazz kind of swing quality out of it, which isn't right because jazz was still 80 years away from this piece. But Rana here plays this perfectly. I'd like to sample that section so you can hear it the way it's supposed to sound anyway. I believe they're dotted triplets with the middle note missing, and it does sound more waltzy. I think she sort of errs on the side of playing them as straight eighth notes here, but it works really well. I like the sound of it. She also lets us hear some of the interesting harmonies in this line. She plays this movement with subtle gradation of tone, and while I'm not sure that this communicates anything deep about the music, it helps the listener hear all of the detail. The section from around the 8 minute and 30-second mark also stood out for me. The subtle change in tone making it stand out, and the clarity of the voices enticing the ear. The interest here is squarely in the right hand, the left hand simply playing chords and keeping rhythm in Rana's interpretation. I actually find this helpful in following Beethoven's morphing ideas. At the 10 minute and 52-second mark, there's an interrupted cadence followed by a music box type of interpretation of the material we sampled earlier. I'm going to say this is not one of the most moving renderings of this movement I've heard, but it is among the most rhythmically incisive and attentive to changing rhythmic detail. Rana has us thinking the piece will end just after the 14-minute mark with her approach, but it unexpectedly goes on. Unless you know the work already, of course, then you know it's going to go on. There's a crescendo on a stuck harmony just before the 16-minute mark, which is interrupted by quieter material drifting around until it finds a way to the cadence. Rana is sensitive to the direction of the harmony in this movement as well. She has the music building confidence toward the end when it finally finds the track toward the final cadence, which is prolonged, I guess, to balance the drifting material before we got here. Tracks 8 and 9 are both the last movement. There's an introduction, which is going to be track 8, and then the fugue starts with track 9. Track 8 is an introduction, and they've separated these two tracks. So track 8, the fourth movement, introduction, marked largo and then allegro. The octave opening almost sounds like an improvisation here. After this, the celestial chords are played with great delicacy. We hear the beginnings of a line that could become a fugue as though material is being tried out. Rana leaves pauses with the effect that she's thinking of what to play for the next section. So she has this sort of improvisatory, where is this going to go quality to her playing. And that's excellent. Music should sound like it's being created on the spot, even though it was written down on a piece of paper 200 years ago. Great interpretative ability here by Rana. Anyway, track 9 is the fuga, marked allegro risoluto, and I'd like to sample the opening of this. I'm going to fade it up here, though. Okay, with the entry of that third voice, I'm going to take us out of that. The voice entries are easy to hear in all the detail because of that long trill that just kind of makes it stand out. The fugue actually starts 6 seconds into the track, as you heard. The fugue itself is so rapid that it's hard to pinpoint any fugal melody, so those trills really help us. Rana keeps the voices admirably clear. The fugal playing is impressive here, as is the clarity of the piano on the recording. I like the measured approach used in the 5th minute to calm down the raucousness of the preceding fugue. The fugue picks up again in the 6th minute and goes on to build up via a series of climbing trills to the final cadence. All right, this is an album that's going to get people talking if they're really interested in classical music, because there's a lot to say about it, both pro and con, really. We get a chance to hear these works reflected through a post-COVID lens here, and this gives us a chance to hear them in a new way. Great music and great art has a way of helping us adjust to diverse situations. I once heard that great art shows us how to live a human life under any circumstances. And it does that by being meaningful in all circumstances, though its meaning may be perceived differently or previously non-understood meanings can emerge. Listen to that again. That was really good. I was certainly compelled by the approach used in both pieces here. Rana has a unique way of hearing these war horses, and that's refreshing, though if you're used to hearing them a certain way, this may pull you out of your comfort zone a bit. It may take some time to assess her ideas, but each new line comes up freshly enough to keep my ears alert. I'd say the Beethoven is the more successful interpretation on this album. Rana is sensitive to the constant changes of rhythm and harmony, which she communicates with subtle gradations of tone and rhythm. It made a lot of the detail of this piece come alive for me. So are these among the best recordings of these works available? I'm going to say no, but I did find them edifying. Rana's unique approach has them sounding fresh, though I question some of the approaches in the Chopin. At other times, Rana's approach had me discovering this music anew. I'd say piano fans should hear this. These aren't really the kind of etched-in-stone sort of recordings you'll get from someone like Pollini or some of the greats of the past, but they're introducing something new here, and I think it's worth hearing.
I think this is the third time we're hearing her on the podcast, third recording. I really liked her phrasing and the touch in the Chopin, and then the energy in the performance on the Beethoven. However, it's hard for me now to compare with the Raphael Bleschatz recording we heard last year because I've been listening to that so often. And
that's a really good performance. Yeah.
His Chopin is just outstanding, and that's kind of what's stuck in my head now. But I do like what she's done here, and this certainly seems to be another step in her great career. She's really young, and her style seems to develop and take some interesting chances each time that we hear her again. So I'm really looking forward to see what she does next and how she may make listeners rethink how they interpret a work in their mind and any preconceived notions they have about the interpretations. Like you said, she never really repeats anything the same way twice, and that really makes you notice something new in these compositions.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought up the Blechach's recording because that was that sounded really fresh. And he's around her age. He might be a little younger than her, but they're both young people.
Right.
So we're hearing some new approaches there, and I think Blechach's really caught the spirit of Chopin better. And the Beethoven he hasn't played, at least not yet. But anyway, interesting recording from Beatrice Rana. Okay, we're off to this week's contemporary composer.
Yeah.
I got another one back. This is Richard Baker, and the album is called The Tyranny of Fun.
Good title.
Let's wrap that around our heads for a little bit. The Tyranny of Fun. Oh. Anyway, this is played by various artists, and I will mention them as they come up in the pieces. It's on the NMC label. This is a British label that releases contemporary classical music from Britain and Ireland, and Baker is from Dudley, England, which is in the West Midlands near Wolverhampton. By the way, NMC, the letters of their label name stand for New Music Cassettes, and it refers to the intended means of packaging its recordings at the time of the founding of the company in 1989. Wow. So they haven't changed the name. Maybe they thought, New Music Compact Discs. Now it's all streaming, so what are we going to do? You can still get these on CD, by the way. They are available. My preferred method of listening. Yeah. Anyway, Baker, the composer here, was a chorister at Lichfield Cathedral. Yeah, I never know if I'm saying British names of places properly, but figure it out. He studied music at Oxford and then composition with Louis Andriessen at The Hague in Holland, or the Netherlands, I guess we'd call it now. Andriessen is a major influence on a lot of younger composers. He was sort of a minimalist, but he had like a rock music kind of quality to the rhythm of his more minimalist work. He's really unique in that field. I really liked his music. Okay, so let's talk about Baker's music. The first work is called Crank. This is sort of an introduction for the rest of the program. It was written in 1994, and it's written for diatonic music box. And Richard Baker is playing the diatonic music box. I don't know how you would play a diatonic music box. Do you just crank it? Are the notches in the music box already formed? And you just have to, I don't know how this works. Anyway, this was recorded on December 10th, 2023. And it was written while Baker was studying in the Netherlands for a project curated by American composer Ron Ford and his partner Annette de Heyer. I can't even really see this, the way this name is spelled, but close enough. This, of course, has one of those toy music box sounds, but the music itself is a set of layered melodies and rhythms sounding like something Conlon Nancarrow would come up with. He's the American composer who punched holes in piano roll paper to be played on player pianos, and they're so harmonically complex that they're impossible for a person to play, although some people have played some of the, I guess, less difficult ones. It's pleasant and intriguing at the same time, and I guess I'm going to have to sample this because what could this possibly sound like, you may be wondering. Well, this is exactly what it sounds like. Let's give it a listen. So I think the instrument creates a lot of noise as well as the melody that it's playing. You can kind of hear the scratching. Anyway, it was really pretty. I liked it. Tracks 2 through 7, Motet 2 for ensemble. And this is played by the CHROMA Ensemble with Richard Baker, the composer, conducting. This was recorded August 4th, 2022, and it was composed in the year 2020 against the backdrop of the pandemic. Boy, I'm tired of hearing about the pandemic. I'm going to tell you. So not only a backdrop of the pandemic, but the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis and the subsequent wave of international protests against structural racism, a contentious presidential election in the U.S., too. Baker himself was isolated at home in rural Wales, watching all of this unfold on his computer screen, as did all of us in Japan. And this made him think about the relationship between the global and the local. So this is a piece that some people like us, Russ, kind of relate to because it's being experienced from afar via the computer here. He created a temporal object of contemplation akin to the Ars Subtilior of southern France in the late Middle Ages, where the interplay of sounds, meanings, and associations are held in place by structural devices. The material for this work comes from, first, a television performance of a Welsh folk song, which I'm not going to pronounce. In English, it means My Lover is Venus, by American actor and singer Eartha Kitt. I guess she sang in Welsh. And second, a BBC Cymru news item about the appearance of racist graffiti in the village of Pennygroes in North Wales. So those are the sources for this piece. Track 1 starts out with brief layered phrases, and it really continues that way, the phrases all building up the material of this brief movement. Movement 2, track 3, is also brief and features reed instruments, especially a honking clarinet. And I love honking clarinets, so I'm going to sample this. Okay, so this comes across as very layered. You have different lines layered on top of each other, not necessarily meshing together. There's an accordion in there too, by the way, and this becomes more emphatic in the middle, which is kind of where I cut us off. It's only a minute long. The third movement, track 4, has a completely different orchestration. I kind of like that quality about this work. Each movement has a completely different orchestration than the others. This one has the accordion, strings, and a muted trumpet in the lead. This movement is the same length as the previous two combined, but still short at just over 2 minutes. High winds take over for the middle section, insistent phrases abound, then the muted trumpet comes back with some percussive accordion chords. The movement is a bit off-kilter, and I found it a bit humorous. Track 5, movement 4, has quick timbral changes at the beginning, then a quick yet shy clarinet line creeps over the accompaniment. The clarinet sort of gets stuck on a phrase throughout the middle of the movement, and it has a satisfying bass sound on the recording, too. Track 6, movement 5, a sustained chord provides a bed for phrases that sound vomited out. They're quick and unrestrained, though relatively quiet. The chord finally changes at 1 minute and 4 seconds, and we're treated to some very present percussion under the thematic material, which brings the movement to a quick end. When I say vomit it out, it means like, it's like the instrumentalist can't keep the sound in and boom, just kind of blast it out at you. Track 7, movement 6, the final movement of this work. This is Motet 2. Has the clarinet playing in its lower end, getting a satisfyingly reedy sound and honking out the quick, angular phrase. This movement is based on layered repetition of phrases, and let's just hear the opening of this. This is the final movement of the work. Okay, and that's a quarter of the entire movement right there. It's pretty short at 2 minutes long. Tracks 8 and 9, we have a new work here. This is the title piece, The Tyranny of Fun for Large Ensemble. This is played by the Birmingham Contemporary Music Group, and Finnegan Downie Deer is the conductor, and Nye Parry is on the live electronics. This was recorded on the 5th and 6th of November 2022 and composed back in 2013. The title comes from an interview in The Observer where theater director Richard Eyre described his childhood as a tyranny of fun and also described how Eyre's parents tyrannized their friends and family with a ceaseless round of parties and amusements as a distraction from their own ennui and desperation. I think I know what he means here. These people are bored and they're throwing these parties and forcing everybody else to have fun so they can feel better. You've been in this situation before, I'm sure. Probably at an office party or something like that. Anyway, Baker refers to this piece as a cheap imitation of George Balanchine's ballet La Valse, based on Ravel's La Valse, and his Valse Nobles et Sentimentale also. The second is a piano piece originally. Baker's inspiration here comes from recent dance music. Recent compared to the waltz, maybe. But what he's referring to is late 70s and early 80s disco just before the AIDS epidemic hit. To me, that's not recent. That's a long time ago. I do remember it, though. I was alive at the time. But I was too young to go to Studio 54 or things like that, which is just as well, really. Anyway, track 8. We get a disco beat that shakes the room here. It's a vivid recording. And while this is happening, a kaleidoscopic array of timbre is heard in briefly shouted out phrases above. I kind of imagine people in the club putting their hands in the air saying, yeah, or like, punching the air the way people will do when they're all psyched up. Let's hear the opening of this work, The Tyranny of Fun. Here it is. I think it's pretty funny, actually. That's what the 1970s was like. Big and dumb disco beats. At the 1 minute mark, the beat stops and the music quietens and grows mysterious. In the 3rd minute, the bass drum beat is occasionally heard, with wind instruments honking odd figures, followed by quiet strings playing short, skittering phrases. In the 6th minute, there's a rather nice, almost romantic French horn phrase, and we briefly hear wisps of familiar material from the musical past in the oboe. It reminded me of Stravinsky. And the movement ends quietly. The 2nd movement begins with a quiet gong and perhaps a bassoon playing at the very low end of its range. It's got a satisfyingly reedy sound. This sort of sounds like frog-like creatures in a swamp at the opening. Listen to this. Great timbres here. I can tell you, I heard almost that exact combination of sounds when I was like walking by like a swampy pond after the rain was. Anyway, after a highly present sustained bass, the wind set up a sort of ostinato phrase, and the disco beat briefly comes back. There's an intervening section of what could be a celesta or a Fender Rhodes piano. I couldn't really tell. It's that kind of bell sound. By the 2nd minute, we're hearing juxtaposed phrases and rhythms, which are suddenly interrupted by that celesta-sounding instrument. In the 3rd minute, we're hearing scuba-like breathing sounds as well. This is a hard movement to give a play-by-play on, as the layered material cuts in and out and is different in the orchestration each time. There's a lot of percussion that I found appealing to the ear in its unexpected timbre. You could say the rhythmic layering is Stravinsky-like, but unlike Stravinsky, it keeps to a sense of decorum as far as volume and outspokenness goes. I'd call it politely decadent sounding. It's enjoyable. In the 7th minute, we hear upfront bass themes. Then the sustained bass washes that away. A rhythm section featuring bass drum plays for a bit, and then the piece ends with a multiplying of note values until we land on a final bass drum thud and a percussion crash. Yeah, I would recommend that listeners sample this piece, especially when they listen to this album. There's a link in the episode, of course. Track 10, Angelus, composed in 2004. This is performed by Three Strange Angels. That's Richard Benjafield and Chris Brannick on percussion. There are only 2 of them, but they called themselves Three Strange Angels. This was recorded back in 2004 as well. So an old recording. I'll refer you to the booklet note for the full inspiration behind this score, but it involves the loss of a suitcase full of scores in Dublin and a subsequent conversation with a Dublin taxi driver in which the composer and the taxi driver talked about the changing nature of Irish society, with the taxi driver remarking, "We still have the Angelus, though," and I guess that was the inspiration. This starts out prettily with chiming percussion, and the piece consists of gentle taps, mostly in the chime and gong type of percussion, with woody percussion accompanying. Despite the title, the piece comes across as more Asian than anything else in the timbres. Let's sample the opening of this work. After the third minute, the music becomes more spare. It's already spare, really. But it becomes more spare still, relying on short phrases followed by pauses full of reverberation. The piece ends with the fading reverberation of the end of a repeating phrase. Tracks 11 through 13 are a piece called Learning to Fly, composed in 1999, performed here by the Birmingham Contemporary Music Group, I guess I should say Birmingham, Contemporary Music Group, with Finnegan, Downie conducting, Oliver Janes on the basset clarinet. It was recorded on the 5th and 6th of November 2022. This is a basset clarinet concerto and an early work written for Timothy Lynes and the London Sinfonietta. The basset clarinet was the instrument Mozart wrote his clarinet concerto to. The unique sound quality of the lower end of this instrument is exploited in this work. The material for the soloist is inspired by the hero narrator of Paul Auster's 1994 novel, Mr. Vertigo, whose name is Walt. This is the character in Mr. Vertigo. He's an orphaned street kid in Depression-era St. Louis, and he's approached by a stranger who promises he can teach him how to fly. Now, if you've read Paul Auster's novels, you know this is not unusual. These sort of magical events sort of come up. The first movement, track 11, is labeled Boisterous, and it has a bit of a groove to it, with some satisfying pedal point honks from the clarinet. The percussion sounds like it's playing a drum kit here. Let's give this a sample. Yeah, kind of groovy.
Yeah.
The clarinet and percussion aren't quite lined up rhythmically, but this is an entertaining movement. It's pretty repetitive, too. I think I hear a Hammond organ in there punctuating certain harmonies. At around the 2 minute and 51 second mark, the brass come in and start challenging the clarinet's position as the point of interest. The clarinet resolves with a groovy line and silences them. Clarinet is just too cool for the brass instruments here. The movement ends with a slapstick, which is two sticks that you slap together. It's an appropriate name for it. A downward clarinet figure, a drum hit, and some sustained brass, I think. They lead to the clarinet into the second movement, which is marked Somnolent, and that's track 12. Here the clarinet picks up on the brass's last note and meditates on that. This movement is rather spare, consisting of sustained clarinet tones and occasional brief punctuating comments from the ensemble. In the middle of the movement, the ensemble starts a complex set of rhythms, but the clarinet's sustained tones come back, and the soloist is left in the spotlight meditating on them. Track 13 is the third movement, Suddenly Awake. The final high note of the previous movement is interrupted by a slapstick again, followed by the now awake clarinet, stuttering an angular set of brief figures. Percussion consists mostly of drum kit taps. At around the 1 minute and 55 second mark, a heavier orchestration comes in, complete with powerful bass drum hits impacting the solar plexus on your stereo. There's a long decrescendo that ends with a sort of breathed out set of quick two-note figures on the clarinet. A ghostly tremolo sound emerges out of the ensemble, and the clarinet plays up in its highest range. This whole final section of the movement has captivating sounds, nice orchestration use of timbre here. The work ends with a light, meditation-ending bell chime. I'm going to sample the end of this work. And that's how the work ends. Next, we have a work called To Keep a True Lent. Appropriate enough as we're recording on Easter Sunday. We're at the end of Lent now. This was composed in 2001, and it's performed here by the choir of King's College, Cambridge, with Sir Stephen Cleobury conducting. It was recorded on 29 February, leap year, 2012. This recording was originally used in an Ash Wednesday broadcast of choral evensong for the BBC Radio 3. The text is by Robert Herrick, who lived from 1591 to 1674, and includes staccato broadsides against the hypocrisy of getting around Lent's fasting rules, a hypocrisy we still practice today, making the text still relevant. It starts as almost spoken text with the first two lines repeated in a rhythm. Now, what he's talking about here is you had to fast for Lent, and monks would make heavy beer so that they could get drunk and their stomachs were full, and they considered that to be fasting because they weren't eating food. So, you're just getting around the rules rather than, following them. The women's voices sing the melody. The rhythmic quality of the work is interesting and makes it stand out as choral work. Let's listen to a sample of this. Track 15, called Hommage Esquisse, and this is performed by the Birmingham Contemporary Music Group, Finnegan Downie Deer conductor, recorded 5th and 6th of November 2022, when I guess the majority of this record was recorded. This was written for Pierre Boulez's 2008 visit to Birmingham. The title echoes Boulez's piece Message Esquisse, which was written to honor Paul Sacher, one of the great patrons of 20th century composers. The music has allusions to that piece, as well as music that Baker associated with Boulez from his years of attending Boulez's performances as a conductor. The opening of the work is pretty cool, with a rhythm crookedly played by snapping strings and harmonized winds playing the thematic material, if you can call it thematic. Let's hear the opening of this work. The orchestration in this piece has a quicksilver quality, and all of it delights the ear. All the allusions to Boulez's Message Esquisse are in the strings. I heard this as a fun and rather delightful piece. The last track has a Welsh title, which for me is unpronounceable. I'm sure it's easy to pronounce, but I can't make out what it would be from the spelling here. Is there an English translation of this? It must be somewhere.
Yes, it means goodbye, friends.
Goodbye, friends. Okay. We'll just say the English title, Goodbye, Friends. Performed by the Birmingham Contemporary Music Group, Finnegan Downie Deer conductor, Melinda Maxwell on the oboe. And this was also recorded 5 and 6 November 2022. This was written to bid farewell to Jackie and Stephen Newbold as they stepped down from their respective roles as executive producer and artistic director of the Birmingham Contemporary Music Group. The song is attributed to Edwin Pierce Christie, who lived from 1815 to 1862, and is well known to English speakers as Goodnight Ladies, but in Wales has been repurposed as a song for children with the Welsh words for Goodbye Friends. You'll recognize the theme when you hear it. I'm going to sample that particular theme. It doesn't really start as a song. We hear the oboe playing two-note phrases followed by a very high sustained note. A droning bass note is played by the piano, eventually to underpin all of this high-end figuration. The melodic material is repetitive. At 3 minutes and 3 seconds, a new solo section for the oboe begins, and it hops from note to note in short phrases, followed by pauses. It's a very sparse section. Other wind instruments are added until we get a sound like paint streaks dripping down a canvas. In the 5th minute, we hear the Goodnight Ladies theme, clearly in some sort of chiming keyboard, yet another compelling sonority. You'll recognize this when you hear it. Let's sample that part. The intertwining wind lines then peter out to bring the work and the album to an end. The music on this album uses some avant-garde techniques, but winds up being very listenable music. That's probably because these works are very rhythm-based. Odd chords and phrases are put into structures and tempi that give the music a sense of being challenging. I hear a lot of winks and nods in this music, as though the composer has a sense of fun, and given the album's title, he seems to be telling us that he has that sense. The Tyranny of Fun was light fun, and I really enjoyed Hommage à Skis, as well as Learning to Fly, the Bassett clarinet concertante work. The sonorities on this album are compelling throughout, and the rhythmic textures are inviting. It's music with genuine content, but it's not so challenging that listeners will shy away. I recommend giving this a try. It's highly creative music, and will be immediately appealing to those with an ear for timbre.
Baker's compositions have a minimalist quality. Sometimes they're really rhythmic and slightly jazzy even. The instrumentation is varied, and he uses the timbres in interesting ways. For example, the muted and wah-wah brass parts in there, those low bassoon parts. It's a lot of fun. I mean, I won't be whistling any of the melodies after I play this.
Yeah, there really aren't many melodies to go by.
Yeah, I didn't find it difficult to listen to at all. It was fun. The choral piece was quite different from the rest, and I'd certainly be interested in hearing some more additional works from him in the future.
And that's it for classical music.
All right, tonight in jazz, the theme is drummer-composers. So you often think of the drummer as the guy in the back who just keeps the beat, right? But these days, a lot of drummers are writing very interesting music. And tonight we're going to start, well, in that post-bop pocket that I love so much. And we're going to work our way out to the musical edges by the end of these recordings. So strap in with your seatbelt for some of this music. We're going to start out with a recording by drummer Lee McKinney. It's called Reflections in Two Shades. It's on Summit Records. It was released March 22nd. Lee McKinney's a jazz drummer based in Yellow Springs, Ohio. That's a half hour east of Dayton and an hour away from both Cincinnati and Columbus. He attended the Berklee College of Music in Boston, and he has a Bachelor of Music degree in Jazz Studies from Central State University in Ohio. He continued to teach and expanded his practice to offer lessons in mallet percussion, as well as teaching jazz drumming at Sinclair Community College in Dayton. And he continued playing music gigs with artists like Norris Tyrrany, Harold Ashby, Greg Abate, Johnny Little, and Tony Monaco, also the Dayton Jazz Orchestra, and more groups in the surrounding area. So on this recording, Lee McKinney drums in all compositions, some of which are revised versions from his college days. Hey, nothing wrong with that. If you have something good, keep it fresh and get it recorded. The great Greg Abate, alto sax. Abate is originally from Rhode Island. We heard him way back in episode 9 on the podcast, Mike. A Fistful of Music, Biber, Barron, Morricone, and more. And that was his recording, Magic Dance, the Music of Kenny Barron on Whaling City Sound.
And one of our better titles from those days.
One of those long ones. We've got Matt Cooper on piano and Chris Berg on bass. The record starts out with a tune called A Shade of Jade. Fittingly, it opens with 8 measures of drums from McKinney, nice tom tones included. Abate is in with the pickup to the happy swinging melody. It's got a repeating 16-measure section, an 8-measure bridge with modulating figures, and then a final 16 measures like the beginning, but with a different ending. Let's hear as much of it as we can in 1 minute. There's a break after the melody into a piano solo from Cooper, swinging with a light touch in the upper register, but with punchy chords as well. And then let's check out some of Abate's solo on this tune a little bit later. Really nice ideas and phrasing there, and he goes on, never running out of fresh ideas with plenty of snappy double time licks coming up too. McKinney gets his own solo with a focus on the snare and then the toms, and once more through the melody wraps up the first tune. Track 2 is called A Living Doll, and that idea could be beautiful or creepy, depending on how you think of it, but this sounds very pretty here. A light clicky bossa groove from McKinney and a bass bounce from Berg. The trio take it around the 32-measure melody, once with the focus on Cooper's piano, and next Abate joins in on soprano sax on this tune for a round. Let's have a listen to that from where he joins in. Abate continues on for a solo from there, and he has a really nice non-nasal soprano tone.
That's a really pretty melody, too.
Yeah, really nice. Cooper follows on piano with nice hesitation and spaces in his lines, and Berg gets a bass solo too, working melodic lines way up into the high register. So let's check out his bass solo in this tune. And Abate returns with the melody and some final phrase repeats and vamping to end it over an unexpected chord. Track 3 is called Lenwood. McKinney gives a 4-measure drum intro. The melody is a 32-measure AABA form. It's swinging but has interesting drum change-ups from the 5th measure of the A sections. Let's hear it get started. Abate's off on a solo there, and things stay swinging. Cooper follows with a piano solo. Berg gets a bass solo too, and McKinney gets a drum solo on this tune, so let's check out some of his drumming here. Yeah, a nice little change up there before another run through the melody with some final fills from McKinney. Track 4 is The Bebop Vampire. Abate is back on soprano for this one. It starts right out on the tricky syncopated rising licks of the 32 measure AABA melody. Nice accents to the lines from McKinney. Let's hear this one get started. Very nice soprano solo there from Abate. Cooper has a piano solo next with some cool rippling riffs, and after that Abate and Cooper trade some eights with McKinney before hitting the melody once again with a little tag of drums and a final chord. Track 5 is called Rebecca, a rubato rippling solo piano intro from Cooper that gets into tempo and is joined by the others. Let's hear it. The melody there has 16 measures of sax, then an 8-measure section of piano, before a final 8-measure section of sax like the start. Abate continues on for an improvised solo with a double-time feel underneath in the rhythm section. Cooper gets a solo section too before Abate is back with the final 8-measure melody section into an ending section of longer interval pairs over rippling piano. Track 6 is called Samba de la Vamos Nos. A samba at a pretty good clip here with a nice bass pulse from Berg and clicks from McKinney. Abate treats us to his flute playing here on the 32 measure melody. It sounds like the same 16 measure pattern around twice, and he's off fluttering on a solo. Let's hear some of his flute playing. Get this tune started. nice flute tone there. Cooper has a piano solo on this one with a nice Latin touch too, before Abate's back with the flute melody that gets a surprise with a suddenly slowed down ending. Track 7, Bird's Eye View. The bird, as in Charlie Parker, it seems to be built with confirmation changes ideas. Maybe the B section's a little bit different in harmonies. Perfect for Abate's bebop skills. Let's take a listen to the melody. Continuing on with that fine solo there. Cooper has a piano solo too, and Abate and Cooper trade off fours with McKinney, who gets to continue on his own before a final round of the tune. Track 8 is the title track, Reflection in Two Shades, another bossa tune with Abate back on soprano sax. There's an 8-measure rhythm section intro, and then Abate is in on the 34-measure melody. It has an extra 2 measures that keep reaching and create anticipation. Cooper has a nicely flowing solo on this one, and we haven't heard one of his full solos yet, so let's check him out on this tune. Abate's in with a solo next. There's a little piano section like the intro before Another Time Through the Melody, and a pause before a final sax phrase and chord to end it. And the recording finishes up with track 9, The Jazz Messenger, an 8-measure intro from McKinney to get things hard bopping. Abate is in on the 32-measure AABA melody that has some topsy-turvy lines over what sounds like a variation on rhythm changes. Cooper has a solo first, and then Abate, and let's check out one more from McKinney on this tune. Back to the melody there to finish it up, and lots of nods to Art Blakey throughout the tune, especially there in the solo, hence the title, The Jazz Messenger. Straight ahead stuff here, all done with taste and flair. McKinney drives it along with solid drumming, tasty fills and accents, and a variety of beat styles. His tunes have variety too. bebop, hard bop, a ballad, and samba and bossa nova. Nice melodies and pleasing chord changes. Abate's saxes and flute add that special flair with great tone and creative solos, and Cooper and Berg play tightly with McKinney and have their own tasty solo spots as well. Expertly played original music in the post-bop tradition.
Yeah, I knew I was going to like this right from the opening track, the first few notes, and it did play out that way. It's just appealing. It's a lightly swinging album of straightforward jazz with tracks, and you name the styles, in a variety of styles. I found myself grooving to the piano's light touch for the most part. He was my favorite on this album. Everything here is uplifting and cheerful, very classy. McKinney himself is a drummer with a light touch that nevertheless steps out for harder hitting solos. Lots of rhythmic subtlety in those. Yeah, I just really like this a lot. It's a good feeling record.
Yeah. All right, we're going to jump over to France for the next album. Olivier Goas, drummer with his new release, Sunland. This is on Double Moon Records. Interesting, you got the sun and moon both there. Came out March 22nd. Goas is a French drummer who has had his own bands for 35 years. He's played with a lot of French and European big names, as well as internationally known players such as trumpeters Kenny Wheeler, Avishai Cohen, Charles Tolliver, and guitarist Ben Monder. His own bands have included musicians such as John Abercrombie, Ralph Alessi, and Kevin Hayes, another pianist we really like. On this recording, Olivier Goas on drums and all compositions, 12 songs that the drummer composed especially for this lineup of musicians, Christian Rondelou on piano, and Lucas Traxel on bass. There are a few notes on the Double Moon and Challenge Records page, getting into detail on a few tunes, and then they mention, quote, Olivier Goas could talk about every song in this way and does so in the album's liner notes. But the beauty of his trio's music is that you can enjoy it without any explanation. That's true, but...
You can enjoy it, but you can't talk about it.
I really wish I had contacted Double Moon earlier to get these notes ahead of time, because there's so much going on here rhythmically that I'm going to have a hard time to put into words. But we'll just listen to some samples, and maybe the listeners can figure it out for themselves. Track 1 is called Good to Be Back. The notes say, quote, the song was directly inspired by the first movement of Vivaldi's Concerto for Two Violins in A minor. My theme spans a sequence of complex meters, including a 21/8 beat, while the bass follows its own rhythmic line, which is also constantly changing. I was scared when I read that because, 21/8.
I got to say, I didn't recognize the Vivaldi in it, though, but I don't know if I know this particular work or not.
Well, certainly there's a lot going on and changing rhythmically throughout the tune. Let's hear it get started and see if you can figure out what's happening. It goes through a lot more rhythmic transformation, including a more lyrical themed section from around 4 minutes that Rondelou works into interesting improvisations surprisingly smoothly before it gets percolating with build-up from Goas to the end. Track 2 is Morning Light. This starts with solo piano in 8-beat sounding phrases. Bass and drums join in softly, filling the gaps in the pauses. It starts getting more rhythmically complicated with choppy piano chords and interesting fills from Goas. There's a sudden harmonic and rhythmic change just before 3 minutes. There are some more harmonic diversions before it returns to the choppy chord ideas with heavier fills from Goas into another more legato improvised piano section. Let's hear some of that going on a little bit into the tune. Well, the rhythmic feels and accents continue to change in sections all the way to the end of this tune. Track 3 is called E Song. It's E period. This has a 4-beat feel and a melody that has a processional feel to it on the piano. Goas fills in the gaps with the light and clicky fills. Traxel has a nicely melodic bass solo on this one, so let's check out the bass solo on this tune. Rondelo's solo that follows has snappy lines that keep a flowing feel to them. When it gets back to the melody, Goas is more lively in his rhythms underneath. I'd say he's a very textured drummer, and the drums are clear but never overpowering in the mix on this recording. Track 4 is called Cross the Undangered Spaces. This tune has a 4/4 time feel with a repeating 16-measure melody. The 4-measure phrases are similar over the harmonic changes. From there, it modulates out into interesting harmonic territories, into a cute rhythmic piano section. Rondelou has another rhythmic but flowing solo on this tune, and the trio has good synergy working it to a climax. Traxel gets a bass solo on this tune too, ringing out some ideas into the higher register. We hear the cute rhythmic figures again on the piano before a modulating section to the end without returning to the original melody. Track 5, Sunland, is the title track. This has a light Latin-type beat and a very pretty melody after an 8-measure intro. It's extended and has 8 and 6-measure sections with a repeating phrase that sticks with you. I was going to sample that, but I really like Rondelou's flowing piano solo on this tune and his hand interaction. So let's hear some of the piano solo coming up. Traxel has another melodic bass solo that works up high with some rhythmic licks as well before they get back to another play through the melody. Track 6, Surface. This is a happy sounding tune. There's an 8-measure intro and then a 24-measure melody made up of repeating 6-measure phrases and reharmonization that seem to end quickly and push it ahead. That idea repeats from the intro section. Traxel has a bass solo that he starts off with the melody phrase, and Rondelou's piano solo has expanding lines with good connection before they get back to the sunny melody and a light ending section. Track 7 is called Song in a Song. This starts in a brisk and light 6/8 feel. There's a 12-measure intro and then a melody that initially also seems to have a 12-measure section before a change. The darting left-hand piano lines are impressive here. Let's hear the tune get going. In the next section, Trexler's bass is super snappy, working it through the next sections until it suddenly loses the beat and momentum and comes down quietly into what I suppose is the song inside the song that unwinds to a pause. It comes out of that with a new driving beat with exciting piano and drum build up to the end. Track 8 is Mirage. This starts with solo piano with both hands in a slow, synced movement. At about a minute and a half, it jolts into a jumpy new rhythmic feel. I have no idea what the meter is here. The feel changes again with some darting piano improvisations over steady bass lines and evolving beats from Goas. It gets choppy again and keeps you guessing rhythmically right to the end. Track 9, Life on Mars, Book of Dreams. A rhythmically hypnotic start with right-hand piano chords and cymbals, and then piano left-hand picking out a melody line. It feels like a 5/8 groove that the bass joins in on. Bass and drums drop out, and the piano gets a slower right-hand figure going that has a 6-beat feel, and then it's time to get really complicated with some polyrhythmic trickery bringing in the other hand and the bass and drums. Let's check it out from there at about a minute and 20 seconds in. Continues evolving from there with some interesting modal figure piano improvisations and more rhythmic changes. Rondelou has an exciting solo with tight interplay from bass and drums. It's really an amusement park ride to the end of this tune. Track 10 is Residual Time, and this has some notes in the release information. It says it uses principles developed by Arnold Schoenberg to create a fluid theme in which the melody and the bass react to each other. Quote from Goas, I regularly went to the New York Public Library during my time in New York 20 years ago. I discovered Arnold Schoenberg's unprecedented structural functions of harmony there. The second chapter, Principles of Harmony, is mainly about progressions in the bass line. The idea of removing the bass line from the accompaniment function and composing a second melody for the bass was like an enlightenment to me.
And believe it or not, I have that book.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
All right, it has a steady rock-like beat and a catchy, sunny 16-measure melody that gets modulated around several times and repeated. The bass line is quite melodic, so let's check it out and keep your ear on the bass. There's another section that transitions to a piano solo with undulating lines and some harmonic diversions that is really interesting, and they work back to the melody section with some variations. Track 11, Survivor's Song. This tune starts out in 4 with a lightly ringing piano melody and soft drum clicks from Goas. It changes to a 3-beat feel. After a pause, it gets restarted with a complicated groove. Is this 11/8? I'm not sure. Let's take a listen to it from that point. Rondelou gets into some dazzling improvised lines with changing rhythmic feels and then vamps around for Goas to work up a bit of a frenzy on the drums over. Let's check out a bit of that later on, since there isn't and hasn't been a real drum solo on the recording yet. And from there, it resets to the original soft melody idea. And the recording finishes up with track 12, Key's Song, which the notes say is inspired by Keith Jarrett's folksy compositions. It's a light, rocky, even beat and gently flowing happy mood melody here of 32 measures that leads to a bass solo from Trexel. Rondelou has another great flowing piano solo on this tune, and that will be our final sample. The recording has an overall airy freshness to it. A lot of that has to do with the sunny melodies in Goas's compositions and the lightness of his drumming with clear, distinct cymbals throughout the recording. For recording with the drummer as the leader, the drums are never overpowering in the mix, and you can hear everything clearly. Many of the songs have a high level of rhythmic complexity, with shifting meters and changing grooves, surprising you right to the end. Rondelou makes it all sound easy on the piano with fluid melodies and solo lines. Trexel locks into the complex grooves with bouncy bass and delivers his own quite melodic solos too. And your ear will constantly be drawn to Goas's drums, which show a lot of finesse throughout the recording. You can put this on and just enjoy it easily, but drummers and musicians might want to get those album notes to know more about what's intended and what he has going on specifically in some of the complex rhythmic sections.
Yeah, this is a pretty interesting album. Despite all the rhythmic complexity, it actually comes across as being heavily inspired by popular music as well. And I think that's because of all the ostinato lines that we hear. I mean, that's really a pop music thing. You have ostinato bass lines and things like that. I didn't know that about the residual time, that there's a Schoenberg kind of influence in there. It's actually a lot more appealing than anything Schoenberg ever wrote, I have to say. It was a nice sounding track. My favorite track on the album was Sunland, I think, the title track.
The title track.
Yeah, it had an appealing catchiness to it, the sunny gentleness. And there's also occasionally a Bach-like quality to the piano playing in the way it occasionally interweaves different melodic lines, sometimes in the same hand. The drums seem to have a solid rock influence. They're often hard-hitting, though they lay back gently on the quieter tracks. And again, despite all the rhythmic complexity in the album. Yeah. So it's kind of a funny thing. It's sort of on both ends. It's not hard to listen to, but it's complicated. So if you want to really dig in, you can really get into some intellectual stuff there. There was impressive melodic bass playing. Many of the themes are catchy, as are certain lines in the piano and bass solos. And there are a lot of rhythmic changes on this album. I liked during solos, like the rhythm would suddenly change a lot too. So it's like the rug is being pulled out beneath the soloist's feet. He's still kind of playing over this new sort of rhythmic landscape, I guess. It made it more interesting for me. That Survivor's Song is an example of that. Yeah, it was appealing, relied heavily on ostinato, complicated, but doesn't sound that way, and really appealing soloing.
Yeah, definitely a fun one to listen to. All right, and our final recording is by drummer Dan Weiss. It's called Even Odds. Cygnus Recordings is the label, and it just came out March 29th. So thanks to Anne Braithwaite from Braithwaite and Katz Promotions for the advanced access to this recording. Cygnus Recordings is an independent record label started in 2022 by Dan Weiss and guitarist Miles Okazaki. And looking at the other recordings on his label, this will probably not become available on streaming. And as of today, March 31st, when we're recording, it's not available on any streaming services. So you can hear more samples on Bandcamp, and the link is provided in the description. Purchasing the digital album is $12, CD is $15, and for you vinyl heads, you got to scratch out $40. So,
that's amazing. That's a lot of money. Wow.
So Anne sends us promotions and publicity write-ups for a lot of recordings, many of which lean really to the avant-garde. And my picks are usually not too far out of the mainstream post-bop tradition, but we're going to go out a bit of that zone for this last recording because the concept is really interesting.
Yeah, I want to say, by the way, if you get the vinyl, you get that big image of the really cool rock, paper, scissors, hands on the album cover. Yeah. I thought that was pretty a nice album design.
It's an interesting cover. Dan Weiss has studied jazz, classical, Indian, and contemporary classical music, West African, metal music as well, and he studied tabla under Samir Chatterjee for 25 years. His trio with Jacob Sachs and Thomas Morgan has 4 recordings, and he also leads a 16-piece large ensemble of New York City musicians. His band Stair Baby blends metallic jazz, progressive, and post-rock music as well. And as a sideman, he has played and toured with musicians such as Lee Konitz, Chris Potter, Rudresh Mahantapa, Linda Mahan, John Zorn, and others. On this recording, we've got a trio. Dan Weiss on drums and all compositions here. Matt Mitchell on piano, and the great Miguel Zinon on alto sax. Now, to fully appreciate what's going on in this recording, we're going to need some context, so I'm going to refer to the promotional information. Let me read it here for you. Even Odds features 2 distinct approaches to the delicate balance of composition and improvisation, both offering their own unique challenges to the trio. 6 of the pieces are traditional compositions, traditional in the sense of providing written material that the trio played and improvised upon together, less so in their reflection of Weiss's singular blend of influences, which draws on rhythmic concepts from jazz, Indian classical music, contemporary classical, West African music, and extreme metal, and a cinematically influenced sense of emotion and atmosphere. The remaining pieces were crafted as game-like provocations, gauntlets thrown down from Weiss to his bandmates. They began life as brief drum exercises or grooves that Weiss recorded solo. He then presented these fragments to Zinon and Mitchell and asked them to improvise over them. These naughty miniatures, many of them clocking in under a minute or two, forced the players to think in focused, densely packed bursts to realize fully formed statements as they traverse these rhythmic dares. Here's a quote from Weiss. Matt and Miguel had free rein to do whatever they wanted. It was true improvisation, with the only form being what the drums were playing. So we've got some compositions that I'll point out and then some improvisations, and we get to compare the improvised versions over the original drum track for several of the tunes as well. The recording starts out with one of the composed tunes, It Is What It Is. Jumpy intervals and tight interaction. Zenon's lines have a kind of ethereal, joyous quality to them. Let's hear this tune get going. Track 2 is another composed piece. It's called The Children of Uvalde, which is written in the aftermath of the 2022 school shooting. This has kind of a weighty, solemn, and slow movement with light drumming. Zenon's sax moves in parallel with Mitchell's piano, and his sax solo has a touching sadness to it. Let's hear some of the sax solo on this tune. Mitchell also has interesting improvisations of cascading notes in his solo before they return to the melody. The ending has just sax and piano emphasizing the feel of sadness. Track 3 is Boo, which is Art Blakey's nickname. This is an improvised track. It isolates a Blakey drum pattern and reimagines it in the tradition of a tabla composition. It starts with Blakey-esque drums, and Zenon and Mitchell exchange darting improvised phrases over it. Track 4 is called Rising. This is an improvisation. This has a rock-like beat with some interesting mixing up from Weiss. Mitchell adds an alternating note idea into chords, and Zenon starts with fluttering single-note articulation into intervals, then working into more extended improvised phrases. All right, here we've got a comparison we can do with the drum track that was first recorded by Weiss, and then we can hear the improvisation over it. So track 5 is called Recover the Mindset. It's just the drum track. So let's take a listen to what inspires the improvisations. Now this is short at just over 2 minutes, but now let's hear what they improvised over that drum track upon hearing it. This is track 6 called M and M. Now the next 2 tracks, 7 and 8, are interesting. These are reversed in the idea from the previous 2. Track 7, Horizontal Lifestyle, is the sax and piano with the drum track removed so that you can better focus on the interaction of the players. So let's hear a little bit of that. Kind of mysterious. And then track 8, Vertical Lifestyle, is with the drum track added. So let's just compare. Track 9 is 5-9. This is an improvised piece, a play on the complex meter heard in the drums. It starts with Weiss's drums and then sax intervals, piano intervals, and then gets more complex rhythmically. I'll have to take their word on the meter here, but the phrasing is interesting. Zenon works up into some shrieks over the seemingly unstoppable momentum of the drums and piano at the end. Track 10 is called Itireffen. What's that, you say? Well, it's Nefertiti spelled backwards and was written with Wayne Shorter's Nefertiti composition in mind. If you know the original tune from the 1968 Miles Davis recording of the same name, the solo piano chords that start this out will be familiar sounding. Zenon plays short, wispy melody lines, and Weiss focuses on light cymbals and fills around the kit. Track 11 and 12 go together. Track 11 is Too Many Outs. It's said to be inspired by poker, and it's the drum track for the improvisation in track 12. So let's hear the beats again here. Too Many Outs. That's less than a minute as well. And now let's hear track 12, Runner, Runner. This is the improvisation over the previously heard beat. Interesting how they came up with that idea from the beat. Track 13, 19 to the Dozen, another improvised piece. It's a play on the meter heard in the drums. Here the contrast between the intricate drum beat, the trudging piano chords, and Zenon's frenzied sax lines makes you wonder how it all fits together. Track 14 is called Max Roach, named after the drummer, and it's based around one of his beats from the Charlie Parker tune, which I can never say, Klakto Wiedsedstein.
There you go.
On this tune, the piano and sax start before Weiss's complex beat joins in. It's very intricate, with some lines synced up between sax and piano. Zenon's improvised solo gets quite intense, as do Mitchell's expanding piano phrases. The drums end up before the sax and piano finish it. This is a composed piece, Max Roach. The piano and sax come in before the drums do. Track 15 and 16 go together. 15 is Bribes and Ultimatums. This is the drum track. It's got really intricate hi-hat work in the drum beat here. You'll be able to hear this clearly anyway in the improvised next track, so I'll just go to that, track 16, which is called Royal Beatings. And the improvisations are unique here, sparse, heavy piano chords with Zenon making high whale calls on the sax. Let's check this one out. This one comes in at about 1 minute and 12 seconds. Track 17 is one of the composed compositions. It's called Fathers and Daughters. This is said to illustrate the more joyous aspects of parenthood. It's a tender and delicate melody for this one, with a recurring rising and falling sax and piano line. Very nice movement together from Zenon and Mitchell. Let's hear this one get going. pretty little line there as a real hook in the tune. Weiss is subtle, adding light textures and tight toms. The sax solo and piano harmonies get a bit out there before coming back to the assuring melody, and it ends on that pretty recurring line there that really is hooked in my ear now. Track 18 is called Peculiar Pathos of Self-Importance. This is a tricky drum beat to improvise over here, and Zenon and Mitchell work through sparse and spaced out ideas with a lot of harmonic tension. Track 19 is Conversing with Stillness, and this begins with the full trio improvising over the beat, and then they take out Weiss's drums midway to leave this kind of more free-floating ballad. And this has a hypnotic feel with the tom beat at first, but then just leaves them floating. So let's take a listen to this. And the final track on the album is called Nusrat. This is another composed one named for the iconic Pakistani Qawwali singer Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, and transplants a Qawwali tabla rhythm onto the drum set, say the notes. This one is unique in both the beat and Mitchell's flowing piano part. Zenon floats light and dreamy melody phrases here. Let's take a little sample of this one as well. Sound. Zenon gets into a groove with a riffy repeated line, and Mitchell has a lot of rippling ideas on piano before it gets bouncier for a while before the ending. And that's it, 20 tracks here. They're mostly very short, some of them under a minute, and it's certainly an interesting concept. The composed pieces are intricate, like all of Weiss's drumming, and convey a lot of different moods from sadness to joyful expression. The improvised pieces take Zenon and Mitchell to unexpected places with a variety of approaches. It all takes a high level of skill and trust to make something like this come together. I like the program idea of having the drum tracks on their own to make you wonder about what ideas it will inspire. Also, the tune with the removed drum track, Horizontal Lifestyle, is interesting to hear the sax and piano interaction without the beats. So, intricate drumming and intimate interaction. If those things interest you, this recording will be a challenging but rewarding experience.
Yeah, despite the challenges, I rather like this. I thought it was a rhythmic adventure and has hard-hitting full studio sound, which was very vibrant and present. Weiss on drums and Zenon on sax are an interesting combo. Weiss responding to the quirks in Zenon's lines, especially at the beginning of the album. I pretty much figured out the approach without reading the notes, because you can kind of tell what's going on, the drums, and then you hear them again, and then the other instruments come in. Zenon and Mitchell seem to be at odds with each other, improvising simultaneously over Weiss's drum patterns in the briefer pieces, because they're just coming up with their own lines. They didn't really plan anything out. But at times they miraculously come together, and as in Indian rags, where the tabla and soloist manage to come together at the end of the rhythmic cycle, those moments make for high points of musical excitement. You just kind of feel this like almost elation when they come together. Despite the rather adventurous approach, Weiss's drum lines often groove, giving the listeners something to hold on to, and the lack of a bass player made this more intriguing still. I like the final track's sunniness, featuring drum patterns evoking the qawwali music of Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, with Zenon grabbing elements of his singing. So if you're familiar with Khan's singing, you'll hear some of those lines in Zenon's playing. It's a wonderful send-off and adventurous album, certainly worth a listen.
Yeah. An interesting combination of all drum-led groups and drummers and composers there. And that's going to wrap up this episode of Adult Music, number 158. As always, we want to say thanks to Fast Signs of Staten Island for our glowing neon logo. And remember, don't forget to check out the Same Difference podcast. You'll hear their promo coming up at the end of this episode. And what do we have to preview for next week, Mike?
Next week, I keep trying to get into Florence Price's music, so I'm going to go for a chamber work next week, her string quartet.
All right.
So one of her string quartets, I guess. I haven't really listened to it yet, so I can't really say. So that's on a new Naxos album with Leo Sowerby's string quartet, or works for string quartet. We have adult music favorite La Serenissima playing
great
works by Tartini. And we have a woman contemporary composer, Danny Howard. We're going to hear some of her orchestra works.
Oh, cool.
So, a little bit of an adventure there. Some new unknown music. Let's see what happens.
Nice. In jazz, I'm going to start with the piano trio. On Cellar Live, we've got Spike Wilner's new one, Contrafactus. I've been listening to that, and I like it a lot. Then we're going to do some organ trio. Go over to the UK with the Nigel Price organ trio. It's called That's It Right There. And then just out on Friday on Positone, trombonist Alton Senkalar's Discover the Present. And that's got a full horn section, including Michael Deese on Barry sax. And we've got Art Hirohara, Rudy Royston, all the players we love with some good arrangements. Yeah. And so it's just going to be a real fun week of jazz listening.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a good week in general.
Yeah. And if you want to find out those recordings in more detail, start listening to them. A few hours after this episode is published, I'll have the playlist up on Deezer, and there'll be a link to it from our Facebook page as well. Any final words, Mike?
Final words. Don't make people have fun. Fun is shouldn't be tyranny.
Shouldn't be tyranny. That's right.
That's my lesson for this week.
All right. I'll try to keep that in mind as we go through into the month of April. And until then, and next week with episode 159, keep listening, and we'll see you again next time.
Same difference. Two jazz fans, one jazz standard. A review of a single jazz standard through music, history, and stories. And this is AJ.
And this is Johnny.
If you are a jazz fan and you like jazz standards, bebop, show tunes, ballads, you name it.
Yeah, we've got them here. We drop a new show on you every other week, and we take a standard and we listen to a few different versions of it.
Same difference.
Come join the fun.
Looking forward to seeing you.